Well, welcome everyone to this Inspiration Wednesday session. My name is Daryl Fleary. I'm a senior courseware developer with Trivantis. And today we're going to talk about conditional actions and variables. Now, you're probably already using conditional actions at some level in your titles. And what we're going to do today is talk about exactly what's going on when you use conditional actions. And we'll also look at some sort of advanced ways you can do sort of compound things, advanced checking with using conditional actions. Now, a very simple conditional action that you're probably familiar with and you may not know you're using a conditional action is when you enter a question. When you create a question and you select use feedback, well, that feedback is actually working on a conditional action. If the question variable is equal to the correct value, then it is showing your correct feedback, and on the condition that the entry by the student is not correct, it is showing your incorrect feedback. So that's sort of the way conditional actions work, only you have a little bit more control than you would with just a question variable. So let's start with a very simple example. And here I've got an entry field, and basically the way conditional actions work is you tell Lectora what you want to do, then you tell it the conditions under which you would want to do that, and then if those conditions are not met, you tell it what else you'd like to do. So basically, do this, if this, and if not, do something else. So in this case, I'm going to enter 555, click my submit button, and you'll see it gives me a welcome message. Pretty simple. If I had entered something other than that and clicked my submit button, I would get my else message telling me what I'm supposed to do. So very simply, if my action was to show the welcome message if my entry was equal to 555, otherwise show a different message. So that's in action based on the condition of a variable. In this case, the variable was the entry field. So let's talk about each of those components just a little bit. Okay, so as I said, the first thing you tell Lectora in an action is what you want it to do. Now keep in mind, we're talking today a lot about the conditions and the else, but you don't have to have conditions or else. You never need to use those. And in most cases we don't, right? We just tell Lectora on mouse click, show something, do something, go somewhere. That hasn't changed. You are not required to use conditions or else. If you choose to put a condition, in other words, I only want to show this welcome message under certain circumstances, then you would go to the Condition tab. On the Condition tab, there are three things you need to do, and we'll talk about those in a little bit, but what you want to do is tell it, I want to do my do action, show the welcome text, if this variable, in other words the entry field, is equal to some value. And then in my case, I also said if it does not equal that value, then I want to do something else. In this case, show another message. Now again, these actions, my do actions, both for my initial general tab and my else, it didn't meet my conditions tab, these are do actions like you do all the time. They could be anything. It could be hide, it could be show, it could be go to, it could be run an action group, it could play a sound, it could play a media file, anything you want. So let's look at then each of the three components that make up this condition tab so we can understand them more fully. There are three components to doing a conditional action. The first component is the variable, what it is that you would need to compare. So in this case, I wanted to compare what was in that entry field. This could be an entry field, it could be a checkbox, it could be a drop list, it could be a question value, it could be a custom defined variable. Any variable in your title, you can compare that to another value. And that includes reserved variables, by the way. We could be comparing the current date variable to see if it has, July 27th in it. So it could be any variable in your course. You can compare it to something else. Okay? In this case, it was the entry field. The next thing you need to do then is determine your comparison. And that's called the relationship. In the example we just did, we compared that our entry variable was equal to some other value. But you don't always have to compare equal to. You have lots of choices, and we'll talk about these for just a minute. You can use contains, which means the value of the variable that I'm checking has in it somewhere the value that we're going to ask it to check. Not that it equals it completely, but that it has it. So for example, my name is Daryl, D-A-R-Y-L. My name contains A-R. Or my name contains a Y. That would be a passing situation. So we have contains, does not contain, meaning the variable that I'm checking does not have in it whatever it is I want it to check. Equal to means the variable that I'm checking is an exact match to the value I'm going to provide. Greater than and greater than and equal to, and the difference there is inclusivity or exclusivity. So for example, if I have a relationship of greater than 10, that means 10 is not included, but 10.001 is included. As opposed to greater than or equal, if I'm using 10, that means 10 itself is included, not just anything higher than 10. We also have is correct and is not correct. You use those a lot with question values, right? So if this is a question, did the student answer that question correctly or incorrectly? Is empty is another very useful one. That means, is there something in the field at all? Are there some characters in that field? So if there's a drop list with nothing initially selected, and the student does not make a selection, that drop list is still empty. If there's an entry field and the student enters no characters in the entry field, then the entry field is empty. And by the way, spaces are characters. So if I were to type spaces in a field, that is no longer empty. It has something in there. So there's empty and is not empty. And then we also have less than and less than or equal to. And then finally, not equal to. So they're kind of in pairs for the most part. Is empty, is not empty, is correct, is not correct, less than, greater than, less than or equal, greater than or equal, contains, does not contain, etc. Okay? And you can use these in various combinations. So that's the second thing, is the relationship. So what is it that we want to check, and what relationship do we want to check it against? And then the final element is the value. And you can indicate the value in 3 different ways. The first way is to put in a specific value, like I did before, 555. So does my variable equal 555? The other thing you can do is put in text. It does not have to be numeric, it could be text. Does my variable equal to boat? Now the thing to remember here is when you say equal to or greater than or less than, it's looking for an exact match or mismatch against what you enter in this field. So if I enter boat, B-O-A-T, the only thing that matches boat is little b, little o, little a, little t. All of these other versions do not match and would therefore be false. Okay? Because it's looking for an exact match. So if you think of it as two transparencies laid on top of each other, if you lay them directly on top of each other and you don't see any difference, that's a match. If there's a difference, that is not a match. So uppercase B, lowercase o, lowercase a, lowercase t is not a match with lowercase b, lowercase o, lowercase a, and lowercase t. So keep that in mind when you're doing conditional variables. If you're looking for a relationship, the value that you put in has to be a match or a not match. Another way you can enter the value that you need to compare to your variable is by comparing your variable to another variable. And the way you do that is you enter var, parenthesis, and the variable name that you wish to compare it to. So if I wanted to see if my variable was equal to another variable, this is how I would do it. Is today's date equal to the value in the current date field, for example? And then the final way you can do a comparison is with a random value. And for that, you enter capital R-A-N-D, left parenthesis, the low value and the high value. So what would happen here is Lectora is going to generate a random number between 15 and 600. And then if my entry matches the number that Lectora generated, then that is true, and we will execute our do condition. If that's not true, then we would execute our else or false condition if we had indicated one. So again, your value is the true state of the variable. If this relationship is true, what would this value be? That's the way to think of it. So do something if this relationship is true, otherwise do something else. So really, this is just a giant sort of true-false question, right? We have something that we're comparing. If that comparison is a match, then we do what we told it to do on our Generals tab. We execute our true action. Yes, this is true, so go on and conduct this action. Or, no, it is not true. In other words, entry is not equal to 555. So then we would do, if we defined one, our false action. Okay? So just think of it as a big true-false. Conditional actions and variables are just basically a way to look at true and false. If this is true, do this. If it's false, do that. Or if it's false, do nothing, depending on how you'd like it to go. Now, you can also have, in this case, we have a single condition for our variable. But you can also compare a variable and value. You can compare with multiple conditions. So let's take a quick look at that. What we could have done in this example is showing if my entry field is greater than or equal to 500, and if that entry field is less than or equal to 600. If that is true, do this. If that's not true, do that. Well, with multiple conditions, you need to determine, do all of these things need to be true, or just one of them need to be true? If all of them need to be true, as in this case, that would mean that my number has to be 500 or higher and 600 or lower. In other words, it has to be a number between 500 and 600 including 500 and 600. Now, when you're doing multiple conditions, the variable that you're comparing does not need to be the same. So for example, if you were doing a login page, you might compare that the name value is not empty and the password value contains certain information. So they do not have to be the same variable, even different variables. And you can have up to 50 conditions on each action. And of course, if you need to extend that, you could simply by making your last comparison or your else action read another set. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute when we talk about compound conditions. All right, so once again, if you need to check multiple things for your condition to be true in order to execute your action, you click the multiple conditions button, and then you indicate, do I need all of the following to be true? And if you think of that, I think of that as all equals and. This and this and this and this all have to be true in order for your condition to be met. Or do just any of them need to be true? And I think of any as or. This or this or this or this. Okay? So all equals and any equals or. All of the following or just one, some of the following. Okay? So that's the gist. I mean, that's really all there is to doing conditional actions and variables. You identify the action you want to take. What is it I want to do? You identify the conditions under which to do that. In other words, if these things are true, do that action. And then if you want to, you can also indicate an else. If these things are not true, take some other action. Now, that's pretty simple. But what do we do if we have a case where it's not all true or some true? What if it's a combination of certain things have to be there and other things don't have to be there? Well, how do we handle sort of compound conditions, right? Such as check something and then have something else or something else. Well, you can't do an and an or together. Remember, these are all of these things or any of these things, not gotta haves and nots. And before you think to yourself, well, this kind of situation could never really happen, let me just point out to you, it happens all the time. Suppose you've got a form like this one, and if we look at that first situation, maybe this is a health risk assessment, and based on this health risk assessment, we're going to send some information to potential clients. Or maybe you're doing some marketing and you want to target a certain population. Or maybe you're creating the next Match.com or eHarmony type relationship engine, and you want to make sure you're only presenting the searches to the right people. So this is a case of, for example, A plus B or C might mean we want to target females who smoke or have high cholesterol. So they have to be female, A, but one of these others, smoke or high cholesterol. Or maybe they have to be male and be African American or Native American. Right? So these sort of compound things happen all the time. So let's talk a little bit about how we can handle that sort of thing. Well, you would think that what you could do is just have an action that checks each of those particular elements, right? Do whatever it is we need to do if they select female. Otherwise, do whatever action is our sort of error, or our false action. And then if it passes that, because Lectora is going to read straight through all your actions, then go to the next one that says do whatever the action is if they are a smoker or have high blood pressure. But that doesn't actually work. And the reason is, when it hits this first action, we check to see if they're female in this example. If they're female, we go on and do our do action. But that's not really correct, because we don't want to do our do action if they're female. We want to do our do action if they're female and they're a smoker or have high blood pressure. So this doesn't quite work. Well, even if they pass that, they are female, or they're not female, we're going to give them the error message. Well, that's true. We would give them the error because that whole condition wouldn't be satisfied. But then it's going to drop through and hit the next action and check to see if they're a smoker or have high blood pressure. And at that point, it may give our error action a second time. So we don't want to prematurely do whatever it is we want to do if the condition is satisfied, because at this point we don't know that the whole condition is satisfied. And we don't want to give our error message twice, right? So we can't just set up actions sequentially like that and expect them to run correctly. So the question is then, what is it that we do? Well, let's take a look at some examples. There are two ways that I'm going to show you. There are actually several different ways. The two ways that I think that are easiest, I'm going to show you today to do compound conditional actions. And the first way is to use action groups. Well, when you have actions listed in your Title Explorer, Lectora reads straight through the actions, as we just saw, and that's not going to work. But with action groups, Lectora will only run an action group when it's told to. So if we look at this first case, what we could do is check to see if the selection is for female. If it's not for female, then we know that this entire compound condition cannot be true because it already failed the first test, and we can do our else action, whatever we're going to do if it's not correct. If it is female, then we will run action group 2, where we check to see if they're a smoker or have high blood pressure. It will never get to this action group unless it successfully passes the first test. So if it passes, so the action here is run action group 2 if the selection is female. Otherwise, provided whatever error actions we want to take. If it's female, we'll go ahead and run action group 2, and now we can check for smoker or high blood pressure. And if that is also correct, well, we know we can now do our whatever action we want to take, because it had to have passed that entire compound thing, or it never would have gotten to the second action group. Again, if it fails that part, we can do our error message. So we're not going to end up displaying our error response or doing our false actions except for one time, either here if it fails this one, or here if it fails this one. And we know that if it gets to this action group, it had to have passed the first action group. Let's look at the second example, a little bit more complicated. Same concept. By using action groups, we know the actions won't get called unless we tell it to go there. The only difference is this one we flipped it the other way. So here we have actions for each of these groupings. So we'll check the first one. Does condition A and condition B exist? If it does not exist, we're going to go to the next action group. If it does exist, then we know this compound is already satisfied. And the reason is we're saying this or this combination or this combination or this combination. In other words, if it hits any of those combinations, then this compound condition is satisfied. So we're going to check the first one. If it satisfies that first one, we know right there we can do whatever our do action is. We don't have to worry about even checking the others. That whole condition has already been satisfied. If it fails that first one, then we'll say, well, let's go on and run an action group and check the second one. So in this case, our else action is to run an action group. Then that second action group says, okay, is condition C or D, C and D present? If C and D are present, then we know that we don't need to check any further. That has been satisfied, and we can do our do action. If C and D are not present, then we can, as our else action, check the next group, and so on. And you just keep doing that down your tree until you get to the last group, where it says is H and I and J conditions, whatever those are, satisfied. If so, again, we can do our do action. If not, we can then take our else action, or whatever our ultimate else is, displaying a message, displaying some feedback, going someplace else, hiding, showing, whatever it is. So this is a pretty simple way to do very complex analysis. Remember, Lectora is only going to call an action group if you tell it to. So by splitting your compound thing into multiple action groups, you can test for it being successful or not, and depending on which way you need to flip it, check the next group. Let's look at one more example, this last one, which has a mixture of ands and ors, and then we'll look at a scenario. Okay, so this last one says, in order for us to target this customer, for example, condition A has to be present, and B or C, and D or E, and condition F, and either G or H, and condition I. Well, that's pretty complicated. But we use the same technique of putting the actions into action groups. And by the way, let me point out, there doesn't need to be just one action in an action group, right? This action group might have several things. You know, it might calculate body mass index based on weight and height, and then if the body mass index is a certain value or not certain value, continue on. Okay, so it doesn't have to be just a single action group. So in this case, we're doing the same thing. We're going to check, well, let's just look at the scenario. We're going to check to see, in this particular case, if the first action is female. If they've selected female, then we know we're still alive, so to speak, in our compound condition, and we'll go ahead and run the second group and check for the second condition. If they have not selected female, we know right then that it doesn't matter what any of the rest of this is, that compound condition cannot be met, and we can take our error action, our else action. Okay? But if they select female, we can then run action group 2, where we check to see B or C. Are they Asian or Pacific Islander? If they are Asian or Pacific Islander, then we can go on and check our next action, which is to say, what is their education level? Are they, do they have high school education or college education? I'll look at the values in just a second. And so on. Okay, let's pull that up actually so you can take a look at it. All right, so if we select female, then that's going to pass our first condition and take a look at the second. The second condition says B or C, and we're looking for them to have either Asian or Pacific Islander. If it passes that condition, it will check the third thing, which is education, meaning they have to have either high school GED or some college, but as we say here, no college degree, which we know associates, bachelor's, graduate, or PhD. So either of these, either D or E, is acceptable. The next thing it would then check, if it passes that condition, it is going to check the marital status. So now we're here in the equation, right? Female, Pacific Islander or Asian, high school or some college but no college degree, And now we want to say their marital status, not married. So anything in this box except for married satisfies this condition. And if that gets satisfied, we look at the next condition. The next condition says they drink. Do they drink moderately or regularly? So again, that's moderately or regularly. Either one of those, either G or H, satisfies this condition. And if that group 5 condition is satisfied, then it's going to go on and check for the final condition, which is a smoker. If smoker is selected, then we know that it would never get to this bottom one unless all the other conditions have been satisfied. And therefore, we can do our actual do action here, or if that also fails, or at any time it fails, we do our else action. So if I click submit, in theory, we should get the right messages here. All conditions are met. So here we did a pretty complex compound action, but we did that simply by using action groups. An action group will only run when you tell it to run. So we're going to tell it to run only if that first condition is met. We'll check the second condition. Only if that second condition is met will we check the third condition, and so on. At any point, if any of those conditions aren't met, we just stop. We do our else action. Let me pull that back up again, and we'll just do it poorly. So right here, I'll click mail. If I click mail, our first condition is not met, so right away we know that the entire string is not met. So that's one way that you can do fairly compound analysis and conditional branching, right? And the thing to remember here is just that either your do action or your else action is going to be to run an action group. Again, it depends which way you need to flip it. In the first case and the last case, we ran an action group if this condition was satisfied. In the middle case, because they were all ors, we ran the action group only if the condition was not satisfied. So that's a simple method that you can use to do very compound conditional actions and variables. Now let's look at one more way that I tend to use a lot. And it's pretty similar, only it doesn't require you to use action groups. What you end up using is a variable. What I did here, I created a variable that I just called check, okay? And the value of that variable is empty. And what I'm going to do, if the first condition is satisfied, okay, I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to do nothing if the first condition is satisfied. So if they select female, which satisfies that first condition, do nothing. Otherwise, change the value of my variable to no. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to check all my combinations. If at any time one of those combinations is not satisfied, I change the value of the variable to no. Right? Okay, so again, do nothing if they select female. Otherwise, set my variable to a value of no. Then I go on and check the next thing, which was ethnicity. Again, do nothing if ethnicity is equal to Asian or Pacific Islander, any of the following. If it's not Asian or Pacific Islander, then change the value of my variable to no. And we just go on and do that for every single string, checking each piece. Do nothing if it passes, change my variable to no if it doesn't pass. And then, so now we've gone through that whole string, checked all our properties, and then we get to the last one, and we add one more that says, okay, show our message of conditions met if our variable doesn't equal no. So it did not equal no to begin with, and it would stay not equaling no unless any of these actions changed it to no. If any of those actions changed it to no, then we know our compound condition was not satisfied, and we can take our else action. And in this case, I changed the else action to run a feedback group, and the feedback group has actions like this that say show a message about the gender or show a message about ethnicity, etc. So let's go ahead and run that and show you how that looks. The result is basically the same. So again, I've got a variable that I'm calling check. If they select female, remember my action is to do nothing. Okay? If they select Asian or Pacific Islander, my action is to do nothing. If they select GED or some college, in other words, no college degree, my action is to do nothing. If they select anything other than married, in other words, not married, my action is to do nothing. If they select that they are a moderate or heavy drinker, or regular drinker, my action is to do nothing. And if they select smoking, my action is to do nothing. All conditions are met because my value still does not contain no. However, let me just do this again. If I select male and Middle Eastern and a bachelor's degree and that they're married, that they never drink, and they have high blood pressure and diabetes and whatever, when I run it this time, my gender is incorrect, so it changed my value to no. So right there, I know my rest of my compound is not going to be successful. And what's happened here, because it's no, we're actually going to get a message for each of these because my else action on my display message was to run an action group that said show feedback for each one. So now you can see I'm going to get feedback telling my learner exactly what they failed to do correctly. Okay? So that's two different ways, pretty simple ways, both of them, that you can do very complex or compound conditional actions and variables. One method was to use action groups and only check the next thing if it successfully passes the first thing. And the second method is to modify a variable. Again, do nothing if the value is correct, or modify that variable to a value of no if it's not correct. Let me flip over now to Lectora and actually show you this in the Title Explorer, just so you can fully understand here what you're looking at. Okay, so here's the Title Explorer for the one using action groups. And as you can see, I've got all these action groups on my page. Here's my submit button. So my submit button says, on mouse click, run action group number 2, this action group here, if the gender is equal to female. So if gender equals female is correct, then continue on to the next action group, which is down here. If it's not correct, we know right then that our compound has failed, and we can display an error message. If gender is female, we jump to action group number 2 that says continue down to action group 3 if ethnicity contains any of the following: Asian or Pacific Islander. And by the way, you'll notice I use contains here and PAC instead of equal to Pacific Islander. I did that just because Pacific Islander is the only one that has PAC in it, and that saved me from having to type out the entire thing. If it contains PAC, they must have picked Pacific Islander because none of the others have PAC. So I just saved myself a little bit of work there. So again, if this is true, we're going to go on and check the next thing. If it's false, we're going to display our message. So that's how the action group one works, and just keeps going down the groups until it gets to the last one. It will never reach the last one unless all the previous conditions have been met. So there we can say, show our message that all conditions are met if it also satisfies this last condition. If it doesn't satisfy this last condition either, we do the same message, conditions not met. So all of these actions are exactly the same. Do nothing, go to the next group, go to the next group, go to the next group, or display our error message. So that's how the action group one looks. If I jump to the next page and take a look at the variable version, okay, again, here's my submit button, and here are all my actions. And my actions say, check the gender. Take no action if the gender is what we want it to be. Otherwise, change our variable to no. Same thing for ethnicity. Take no action if ethnicity contains what we want it to contain. Otherwise, change our variable value to no. And these are really, really simple to create because they're all the same, right? All of them are take no action and set the variable to no. So the only thing that's different is just changing the condition. So it took me about 2 minutes, if that, to create all of these actions. Right? In fact, I'll just do the last one for you, smoke again. So I just came in, I'll take the drink one, I'll copy it, paste it. We'll change this to check smoking. Again, we're going to take no action, that doesn't change, and set the variable to no, doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the condition, and in this case, we're going to have a single condition, and that condition is, does my smoke value equal on? Because it's a checkbox. That's all there is to it. So it's very easy to make all of these changes because they're exactly the same except for the condition that you're testing. And then the last thing I did in this group was all of these will set the variable to no if they fail. If it gets all the way down to the bottom and it didn't fail, I'll say all conditions are met if that variable still does not equal no. If that variable does equal no, in this case, my else action is to run an action group with feedback, and that's just here, and each of these just says the action was to show an error message if gender is not equal to female. So in other words, again, do nothing if gender did equal female. If this is false, show an error message. Gender incorrect, ethnicity incorrect, etc. So what I'm going to do now then is begin to field any questions. I want to remind you that you can certainly email me at fleary@trivantisdev.com if you have additional questions. And of course, feel free to join us for any other Inspiration Wednesday sessions that we have upcoming. So with that, let me say thank you for joining. And now I will hop back over and unmute the phone lines and see if we have any questions in the chat.